Ladies and gentlemen, James Lane here, and in this segment, I felt it very important to clarify something. You see, Safe Harbor Day is approaching, December 8th, and a lot of Trump supporters are very, very nervous. The news, the media, everybody's pumped it into you that if we don't get things done by the 8th, we're screwed. Well, I've got news for you, ladies and gentlemen. We are not screwed whatsoever. You want to know what I'm talking about? You need to know the inside information? Stick around and watch this video. Ladies and gentlemen, how are you doing? James Lane here. It is Sunday, December 6th, just 2 days away from Safe Harbor Day, and I know a lot of you are stressed. I know people are still going, what the hell's happening? We're not seeing anything. I've got a lot of folks on the parlor freaking out, sending me messages, thinking that the world is falling and meatballs are coming down from the sky and creatures are coming up from the bottom of the earth. No, folks, reality has not ended, though 2020 has been very weird and has shifted our concept of reality. I'm sure a lot of you understand that and recognize that. But, ladies and gentlemen, it is not falling apart. In fact, it is accelerating. I'm sure you feel the momentum. I'm sure you've seen the news. I'm sure you know we've seized the servers. I'm sure you know we've seized machines, and we're doing forensic investigations on those machines. And we could do some more segments and things on that another time. Folks, things are accelerating. I believe there's a tidal wave out there. And, before a tidal wave hits, if you're standing on the ocean, if you're unlucky enough to... I should shut my phone off. Sorry about that, guys. Let me toss this. So if you're standing on the shore and you're unfortunate enough to experience a tidal wave that's about to be sweeping you away, you would see the ocean recede. You would see the tide roll back. You would see everything get sucked back into the distance. It would be vacuumed almost into the depths of the ocean. It would be bringing it back, powering that wave that you just can't see in the distance. And unfortunately fortunately for us, but unfortunately for the blind left, they don't know what's about to hit them because the oceans have receded and they're standing on the shore going, everything is going to plan. That's funny. Where did the water go? Oh, but folks, that tidal wave of MAGA is just, it's on the way. Oh, and it's going to be so devastating to them. We're going to have some amazing memes, ladies and gentlemen, but that's not what I want to talk about this entire time. I know I'm kind of going on and on. That's becoming my MO. What I want to talk about is the Electoral College deadlines not being set in stone, all right? I came across this article on the Epic Times talking about the integrity of the election and a watchdog group putting out a publication, putting out a study, whatever you want to call it, a watchdog announcement, a watchdog research analysis, maybe that's the best one, that would show what the constitutionality is of the dates, what's actually happening when you assess what's going on through these states. And though it may seem like I'm going to read this whole thing to you, I'm actually just going to read this top thing right here. This is by Tom Ozimek. This came out on the 5th, on Saturday, guys. It says, an election integrity watchdog said the current electoral college deadlines not only have zero constitutional basis, but are preventing states from fulfilling their legal and ethical obligations to ensure free and fair elections. All right. The Amistad Project of the nonpartisan Thomas More Society released the study on Friday. All right. Folks, you know me. I do read a lot of articles, but if I can, I'm going to skip right over the article and go right to the study. Come on, you know me better than that. I'm not going to bore you every video with an article. I'm going to go through this damn study and I'm going to give it to you directly from the horse's mouth. Now, really quick, before I do that, I just want to show you something. Head over to the American Reveille website, www.americanreveille.com. We just had a new release this morning, a great new article from Thomas Marlowe, one of our contributors. It's called Conspiracy, Coincidence, and the Fading Memory of the Collective American Consciousness. Excuse me, I'm messing up the word. But it's a great article, and I know not everybody agrees with JFK, but he takes a little time in here to show some of the words that JFK has spoken in the past and brings them forward with events that are happening today while going over some of the mainstream media, the things that are happening with communist China. I don't want to blow the cover of it because it's a fantastic, fantastic article. It blew me away when I was doing the editing and publishing. It was fantastic. So I just wanted to take a quick moment to spotlight that and show you that. And also, we have the Traitors, Turncoats, and Treason papers that Jessica Lee has been working on. And we should have a second installment of that within the next day or two. So we're looking forward to that, ladies and gentlemen. So let's get back to this. All right. This is from the Amistad Journey, the Thomas More Society. All right. This is an election integrity watchdog group. Their job is to make sure and observe and put out information about whether or not elections are doing the right thing. This is what they do. This is what they've done. This is their MO. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, set in stone, a historical, constitutional, and legal examination of electoral college deadlines and their implications for the 2020 presidential election. All right. The Amistad Project of the Thomas More Society. Oh, yeah, we are going and going and going. Executive summary, ladies and gentlemen. The only electoral college deadline specifically required by the Constitution is noon on January 20th, at which point President Trump's first term officially ends. All right, he's still the president, ladies and gentlemen. All other deadlines, the safe harbor deadline of December 8th, the electoral college voting December 14th, and even the congressional vote on January 6th are dates set by federal law. Moreover, these dates are arbitrary, being based on obsolete and outdated concerns. It is also well established that the U.S. Constitution is the highest law in the land, holding precedence over both state and federal laws. All right. In the event that federal law presents an obstacle to faithfully adhering to constitutional requirements, it is necessary to disregard the statute in favor of the plain meaning of the Constitution. So that means that if these laws that were put down for these dates end up infringing upon the rights of the people because it's not enough time to investigate obvious fraud, but fraud has been shown to the point where an investigation is merited, then the judges can just throw those dates out. They don't matter. They really don't, because the Constitution trumps all of this. That's what that means right there, folks. All right. Now that we've gotten through that, let's understand the safe harbor provision. Everybody talks about it. December 8th, safe harbor, December 8th. Nobody explains anything about it. So let's talk about it. The so-called safe harbor provision in federal law, 3 USC 5, all right, simply asserts that if a state has established laws governing the appointment of electors and a determination made according to that law has been made at least 6 days prior to December 14th, the date fixed by federal law for federal law for the Electoral College to convene, then that determination is final on December 8th. The Supreme Court has ruled that the law does not actually require states to appoint electors by that date in order for those electoral votes to be counted by Congress when determining the winner of the presidential election. So it's basically a disclaimer. All right, think about that. You ever open up a program or buy something and like a disclaimer pops up? It's like, hey, just letting you know, blah, 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 blah. Just letting you know, whatever it says, it's just letting you know something. Look at this right here. Again, the so-called safe harbor provision, it just tells you, it asserts that if a state has these laws and they happen to do the thing and do the vote, and it happens to come in 6 days before, it's cool. They'll take it. But if they don't, that's cool too. That's all that says. That's really all that says, guys. In the current context, states have laws in place awarding presidential electors according to the popular vote. Because the laws governing the vote were violated in numerous ways in several key states, certification of the election results cannot be said to have been made in accordance with the laws established in those states. So they were breaking the laws in the first place. So how can they actually be legitimate? Therefore, the responsibility still rests with the state legislatures to appoint their state electors, because no determination made pursuant to such law has been made. Because the voting was illegitimate, the power needs to go back to the legislatures, all right? The people that make up the state's Congress and all that stuff. They have to be the ones that can select the electors instead of going by the popular vote, because the popular vote cannot be verified. The integrity is out the window because of what happened. In the Constitution, it states that the legislatures make the decision upon how the electors are chosen. So if the legislatures of the state want, they can just say, screw the vote, we're picking people. You see what I'm saying? There's all kinds of ways that this can be done. The Constitution just lets us know that it's the elected body of people, the legislature, that's supposed to be doing it, not the judges and the governors and all that crap. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So popular elections failed in numerous states. This document's now going to go over a couple different states here. And I hope you're getting something out of this, guys. I really feel like this is important information for us to have, especially with this this safe harbor provision coming out, guys. So look, popular elections failed in numerous states. The Constitution instructs the states to appoint presidential electors in such a manner as the legislature thereof may direct. Since 1860, all right, all states have passed laws according to their electoral votes, according to the popular vote in the presidential election. 2 states, all right, Maine and Nebraska award 1 electoral vote to the winner of the popular vote in each congressional district, but the remainder are awarded to the overall winner of the state. All right. That's something to show you that states still do things differently. All right. We don't have this big national mandate. That's something that a lot of people don't understand. I know a lot of folks on the right understand. A lot of folks on the left, most people on the left, don't understand a thing, but they're out there thinking that we live in some world where the president can make blanket decisions, where federal law covers everything, where stuff just isn't as complicated as it is. And it is meant to be complicated, ladies and gentlemen, because that's how we check and balance our system. It has to be a pain in the ass, because if it's real, if it's true, if it's worth it, then we'll walk over coals for it and we'll endure that pain. It weeds out this stuff, folks. But every state has its own way. Every state's almost like a little mini version of the federal government. Think about it. We have a governor in a state. That's like a president. You have the little secretary of state and the different people, the secretary of this and that, the treasury person, all those folks. It mimics each other. It's like a little miniature version. There's a state legislature where they have their own versions of Congress and things like that, where we make our state laws, all right, that fall under the federal law. So it's almost like each state is like its own little mini country, its own little mini United States. And that division of power is what gives such strength to the integrity of our Constitution, how these things were made. So we have to recognize that each state's going to be different. And it can be emotionally frustrating for some people because they don't understand that you're going to have different rulings. You could have the same ruling, for example, in Georgia and Pennsylvania, but in Georgia, that ruling means one thing, in Pennsylvania, it means another. You just don't know until you do the deep research. And that's why I'm trying to give you guys some of these tools so you actually can be armed in this fight. All right. You don't want to walk into this First Amendment war with just your fists. Let me give you some brass knuckles. Let me give you some chains. Let me give you the Uzi of truth. All right. You don't want to just be punching people in the face when you can be shooting them with the Uzi of truth. Ba, 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 ba. Article 68, ba, 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 ba. Federalist Papers. Ba, 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 ba. Excuse me. All right. I know I'm. Let's keep going, ladies and gentlemen. All right. The Constitution. All right, also grants states the authority to establish the times, places, and manner of the elections, which state legislatures have done by crafting laws governing how elections should be conducted. Yet in at least 5 key swing states, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, all right, Election laws were routinely and flagrantly violated by election administrators and state officials during the 2020 presidential election cycle. Now, this PDF here is going to go over each state in brief. All right. This is a great read, ladies and gentlemen. It's only 8 pages, so it's not going to take me 3 hours to get you through. And the folks that are just looking for information are going to really get a turn on from this. So Arizona, guys. State of officers, all right, and Maricopa County officials failed to enforce the state law against private companies from directing Federal Election Administration accepting millions of dollars in private grants that gave some voters in the state access to advantages that were unavailable to voters in other parts of the state. That's called disenfranchising Republican voters, ladies and gentlemen, making sure that they have an unfair circumstance while other groups that voted for the Democrats had a much more pleasant experience. Let's put it like that. These officials also allowed for gaps in the chain of custody of official ballots through the use of mobile drop boxes that are stationed in unsupervised public locations, failed to enforce the state law against double voting, and failed to enforce state law against allowing people to vote using an address where they no longer live. Most of that's self-explanatory. When they talk about chain of custody, when you're dealing with things that need to be handled in a secret or top secret or sensitive manner, trust me, from some of my military experience and things I understand, you have your hands on something. There's a certain way things are processed. There's a quality assurance to it, all right, where this goes, the ballots or whatever it might be you're transferring. It could be radios, hard drives, anything that has a sensitive clearance, anything that needs to be verified. It goes from point A to point B to point C to point D. There's a check and balance system in line there. So the integrity of what's happening remains. All right. The chain of custody means that the ballots are supposed to go here, then they're supposed to go there, then they're supposed to go here, and then they're supposed to go there in that order. All right. I know it's kind of vague, but I'm just pulling it out because it's the concept behind it. All right. If it skips one of those, you cannot legally say that you can trust any of it because they skipped a step in ensuring that they remained honest, all right, that nothing happened to them, all right. The chain of custody is there for a reason, ladies and gentlemen. If you need a better explanation of that, just complain about it in the comments and I'll come up with a better explanation. I'm just pulling that out of my ass, all right, ladies and gentlemen. It's truthful. It's factual. It just didn't come from a handwritten nice place. It came out of a cavernous place. Anyway, all right. As a result of these violations, data experts estimate that more than 300,000 potentially fraudulent ballots may have influenced the outcome of the popular vote in that state, including more than 200,000 illegal ballots that were counted and about 75,000 legal votes that were not yet counted. Remember, look at those big numbers. Remember, a lot of these states, you're only up 10,000, if that. Remember, they keep saying we have more than enough evidence to not only overturn this election, but overturn it 10 times over. They don't need that much, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go to Georgia. Fulton County, and we've heard so much about Fulton County lately. Fulton County officials illegally accepted more than $6 million in private grants that imposed conditions on the conduct of elections, all right, without authority from the state legislature. In addition, state election officials entered into a settlement agreement with the Democrat Party that created rules for processing absentee ballots that directly contradict the legislature's intent. Officials also failed to enforce state law residency requirements on voters who changed addresses before November 3rd, 2020 election, leading to an estimated 20,000 unlawful ballots being improperly counted. It gets better, folks. That's enough, right? Data experts put the total number of illegal votes counted and legal votes not counted at more than 200,000. Far greater than the margin separating Joe Biden and Donald Trump. What is it, 5 or 10,000 now? 200,000, folks. All a judge has to do is disqualify a couple percentage points of that. Trump wins Georgia, ladies and gentlemen. Michigan. Let's go to Michigan. Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson gave private activist organizations direct access to the state's voter files, which should be accessible. By the way, Remember, it's not election fraud, ladies and gentlemen. Remember what Trump said again and again. It's election official fraud. Election official fraud. Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson gave private activist organizations direct access to the state's voter files. Okay? That's your information if you live in Michigan, which should only be accessible to election clerks. She violated a state law requiring signatures for absentee ballot requests by establishing online voter registration without any statutory authority, and unilaterally decided without legislative approval to send absentee ballot request forms to every single household in the state, without even checking to see whether the register voters listed for each address had died or moved. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, the Supreme Court rules on constitutional law. All of that breaks constitutional law. All of it. All of it. The whole thing. Everything I just read you. We want this stuff to go up, ladies and gentlemen. We want it to go up. Michigan election officials also failed to provide meaningful observation of the vote counting process, a violation of the Michigan Constitution, as well as state statute MCL 168.765 Alpha 12. The refusal to allow observers to oversee the process resulted in significant abnormalities. All right. They're not allowing these folks to see what's happening. All right. Everything they did made it so nobody could tell that all this craziness went on, and for good reason. There's obvious corruption. In Detroit, for instance, 71% of the city's 134 absent vote counter boards, AVCB, were left unbalanced with no explanation. Ladies and gentlemen, as a result of these violations, this is for Michigan, data experts identified more than 500,000 potentially fraudulent ballots. These aren't tiny numbers, ladies and gentlemen. These are monumental, gigantic numbers. Trust me, there's a hurricane coming, folks. I hate to say it like that, and I'm not trying to sound like some kind of seer or something like that, or some kind of what would the word for it be? I'm not trying to sound like Miss Cleo down in Florida psychically predicting anything. What I'm getting at is, regardless of what happens now, this can't be ignored. This is ridiculous. This is buckets of evidence, mountains of evidence. This isn't coming from Trump himself. This is coming from an actual election integrity watchdog group. Those places were taken seriously up until this election. It's absolutely insane what we're seeing right now, folks. You have to understand that. You have to understand the historic gravity of what's going on right now, because this has just never been seen before in this scale and never been done before with this type of technology. So it's being denied a lot because it's new and it's fresh, and it's something that hasn't been seen on such a scale ever before. And in fact, this type of fraud, this type of revolutionary feeling in America hasn't been felt even during Vietnam, even during World War II, for the most part. What we're going through right now is something that hasn't been felt since the 1800s, ladies and gentlemen. So you have to take that into consideration, that folks are going to say that this isn't happening, and it's going to seem unreal, but that's because nobody's been alive for this. There's nobody alive right now in this country that's ever experienced anything like this. All right. The closest thing we can imagine is third world countries and other places that have collapsed into calamity in the recent years that have experienced something similar, but they don't have a constitution like we do. They don't have the Second Amendment like we do. They don't have free speech like we do. So nobody's going to really know what to expect. Only thing we can really do, the only thing that makes sense, is to look into the past, like we've been doing on certain episodes, certain podcasts and segments, and really try to mine the data from our elders, from our forefathers, and see where this may go. And that's what we're doing. But, I mean, the absolute scale of this is the likes of which this world has never seen. The results of this are going to shape the destiny of this country, and I dare say the political and social patterns of the world for decades to come. That's what we're facing. That is the gravity of this situation. So, all right, back to the paper. Pennsylvania, folks, urban counties such as Allegheny, that's Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Delaware County received over $10 million in private grants that impose strict conditions on the conduct of elections without legislative approval, violating state laws prohibiting the use of private money to pay for federal elections. Think about that. There's a law that says you can't use private money to fund elections, all right? But there's $10 million in private grants. That's a gift of money. That's private money. That throws out a lot of things, in my opinion, ladies and gentlemen. Look, in addition, election officials took unlawful steps to pre-canvass mail-in ballots and help voters cure flawed ballots that had missing or incorrect information or otherwise failed to meet legal criteria designed to prevent fraud. All right, folks? Basically, in some counties, they called you on the phone and they said, hey, Mike, hey, Sally, come down here. Your ballot's all screwed up. You can fix it, though. We really want to make sure that the election and the vote is fair and free, and you get your chance. Mikey, you get your chance. Susie, you get your chance to vote, to exercise your American right. And that sounds fantastic. I mean, great, right? It's illegal as hell, but hey, why not? They came down and they fixed their votes for Biden, while in Republican counties, nobody got a phone call. In fact, at some places that they voted, they were even given Sharpies. So, Secretary of State, is that where I'm at? Yes. Secretary of State Kathleen Bachvar, I think I'm saying that incorrectly, but whatever, also exceeded her authority by issuing guidance granting permission for counties to engage in these unlawful practices. So they got permission from the Secretary of State. Ooh. That's still unconstitutional, by the way. She issued this guidance less than 24 hours before the polls closed. Wow, great timing. Insufficient time for counties that had not engaged in those practices to take advantage of them, even if the guidance was illegitimate. Even if the guidance were legitimate. It's illegitimate guidance, but they were saying whether it was right or wrong, the other counties, the Republican counties, had no time to act on it. These practices resulted in over 100,000 potentially fraudulent ballots, according to the analysis by data experts. And we know Rudy Giuliani has talked about having over 600,000 ballots, I believe, in total, with many more, I think, than 100,000 in Pennsylvania. Let's go to Wisconsin. Wisconsin law requires photo ID for absentee ballot requests, specifically to prevent fraud. All right? That's one thing that we're talking about before. Wisconsin, in their law, it doesn't matter what federal law says. In Wisconsin's law, they require full voter ID. All right. Notably, the law mentions the legislature's intent to prevent overzealous solicitation of absent electors who may prefer not to participate in the election. The Wisconsin Election Commission also violated state law by allowing voters to claim indefinite confinement as a means of avoiding the legal requirement to provide a photo ID when requesting an absentee ballot. All right. This legislature, the legislators, they established this exemption for the elderly and the disabled. That's what it means by indefinite confinement, ladies and gentlemen. If you're at a nursing home or in hospice, or you can't get up off the bed, you're disabled and you're in a wheelchair in a situation where you're not mobile, right? They still want you to have your right to vote. So they don't want to burden you any further. So they don't need your ID. Just send us the vote. It's going to be a minimal amount of people anyway. They used COVID to say that everybody was on indefinite confinement. Do you see where we're coming from? How that's fraudulent? How that's absolutely crazy? Think about that. Just think about that for a second. We went from hundreds of people, possibly, maybe dozens. I don't know how many people are bedridden in the state of Wisconsin, to millions of people that could have potentially used that. It's absolutely insane, folks. Absolutely insane. Let's see. Many of these individuals claimed in 2020. Subsequently, they left their homes to participate in family outings, political protests, other activities that directly contradict their claim to have been indefinitely confined. Yep, there we go. They're saying that a lot of these folks that claimed that anyway for the COVID, they went and did protests. They were rioting. They went to family outings. People went to Pizza Hut. I mean, you can't. Think about it like this. You ever have an L&I claim? We're all blue collar here. You've been injured at work. I know a lot of you have, or you've known somebody who's been injured at work. You go to the doctor, right? And you claim L&I, and it sends something to your job. The job tells you, okay, stay home you hurt your back, let's say, stay home for 6 weeks, no heavy lifting. They give you physical therapy and all of that crap. And, in order to get your money, you're supposed to stay home and not do anything. Right? But let's say 2 weeks in, you feel okay. And so they catch you at Walmart picking up groceries and putting them in the cart without your back brace on. All of a sudden, your L&I claim is out the window. You're getting fired from your job and they're wanting their money back because you didn't follow the rules. Think about that basic scenario. Many of us don't know anybody who's been caught. But I've heard the stories of people who've been caught fraudulently claiming disability and L&I because they've injured themselves at work and they wanted time off. And then they get caught and then they lose their job. I mean, not just that, they end up in court. People get sued for this stuff. It's highly illegal. So if I can't BS an injury at work and I can't get away with that, how come hundreds of thousands of people can get away with being indefinitely confined? Maybe not hundreds of thousands, maybe tens of thousands, maybe thousands, still a lot of people. How can you claim to be indefinitely confined and then go do cartwheels at a Black Lives Matter riot? I think that should disqualify their L&I claim, if you know what I mean, ladies and gentlemen. I know I went long on that little thing there, but I mean, it's kind of important for people to understand the comparison. I mean, what they're using. It's kind of disgusting if you really think about it. I mean, it's a thing, indefinite confinement. It's made for geriatric folks that can't get out of the bed. It's made for people that are suffering. And they took advantage of it because of COVID, and then rioters and people that went to basketball games and people that, not that they shouldn't go out, not the rioters, but, people that want to be with their families and stuff. But you can't claim that you're confined and then not be confined. They shouldn't even have had that right in the first place. And I'm sure you agree with me. The data experts estimate that more than 150,000 votes were affected by these violations, guys, including nearly 100,000 illegal ballots cast by individuals falsely claiming to be indefinitely confined. So there it is, 100,000 people, folks, 100,000 people pretended to be confined. Despite the obvious problems that occurred on Election Day in a number of states, election officials in urban Democratic strongholds are refusing to allow access to ballots, ballot envelopes, surveillance video of counting centers, and video of loading docks and receiving docks, Dropbox logs, and video of Dropbox locations. Think about that. They're blocking all of that. Now, we did see some Georgia surveillance come out, and the one surveillance we got uncovered I think her name was Freeman, the fraud that her and her daughter were committing in Georgia, I believe it was. I might be off. It might be Michigan, but I think it's Georgia. I mean, if one video can show that, if one log shows that, we should see them all. But instead, you have Democrats not allowing their release across these states, folks. Look, surveillance video. Oh, there we go. See, surveillance video has already, I skimmed through some of this, so sorry about that. Surveillance video has already revealed fraudulent ballots being counted in Atlanta, and video surveillance and GPS information is available to corroborate sworn testimony by U.S. postal employees and subcontractors with the U.S. Postal Service that hundreds of thousands of ballots were moved across state lines. That was that brave gentleman that we saw the other day talking about bringing those hundreds of thousands of ballots from New York to Pennsylvania. That was very brave of that man. He's probably going to lose his job, if not risk his job. Thus far, officials have refused to release any of this evidence. All right, let's keep going here, folks. Current electoral deadlines are merely current federal statute. They are not constitutional law. This is a big deal here. Constitutional law takes a huge amount of effort to change, but federal statutes don't. Not at all. Listen to this. In 1789, electors were appointed on the first Wednesday of January. Electors met on the first Wednesday in February, and the electoral vote was tabulated by a joint session of Congress on the first Wednesday of March. For over half a century, from 1792 till 1844, electors had to be appointed anytime within the 34 days before the first Wednesday in December, and the electors met and voted on the first Wednesday in December, and then for 139 years in every election between 1792 and 1932, except for the 1876 election. That was Rutherford B. Hayes, ladies and gentlemen, a somewhat similar situation. The electoral vote was tabulated by Congress on the second Wednesday of February. I believe 1876 was Hayes. Don't quote me. Look it up. If I'm wrong, call me out on it. If I'm right, give me some kudos. Anyway, for 44 years, between 1888 and 1932, the electors met and voted on the second Monday in January. A single national day for appointing electors. It wasn't established at all until 1848, guys. Moreover, Tuesday was picked based on obsolete religious and agricultural concerns. In the 1800s, most citizens worked as farmers and lived far from polling places, since it often took people a day, an entire day, to travel to a polling place. Lawmakers needed a 2-day window for election day. Weekends were out of bounds because Sunday was for church and Wednesday was market day for farmers. Finally, the current dates for electors meeting and voting and Congress tabulating electoral votes have only been federal law since 1948. So, take a look. Appointment of electors. They're just laying out reasons, by the way. Other reasons, whether arbitrary or not, whether they matter or not. They're laying out the facts behind saying, hey, this hasn't been something that's like for an important reason. It's been here only since 1948 and it's changed a bunch of times. Take a look at all the times it's changed. That's all that's saying. Appointment of electors by statewide popular vote is a local legal custom, not constitutional law. Here's an example. For instance, South Carolina didn't adopt electors until 1860. All right. There is precedent for delaying and changing election deadlines in the event of unclear or questionable results or other circumstances. And here's some evidence to show that, guys. March 4th, 1789 was the earliest date on which the electoral vote could be formally counted by Congress during the first election. But the first Congress, did not achieve a quorum in both houses necessary in order to hold a joint session of the entire Congress until April 6, 1789. So, the electoral vote coming out of the first presidential election was not counted and tabulated by Congress until that date. That's the original precedent. The original tabulation was April 6. So, in the 1876 election, it became apparent well before the tabulation joint session of Congress was scheduled to meet on 14th of February, all right, guys, 1877, it became apparent that something was terribly wrong with the electoral vote coming out of the meetings of more than a few electoral colleges held on 6th December 1876. Not only would the electoral vote be close, as could be easily discerned from the reports of the popular returns in each state, as already published in newspapers around the country, around the nation, but at least 3 states in the South. And remember, this was the post-Civil War Reconstruction era. They were sending 2 sets of electoral votes, one in favor of each major party's candidates. And then to make matters worse, now think about that. The states, instead of giving us one answer, they were giving 2 answers. All right, that was happening across multiple states. The state was saying, here, we want both, and it doesn't make sense. It couldn't be tabulated. Think about that. Well before tabulation, joint sessions of Congress They were scheduled to meet, all right? Something was very wrong with the electoral vote coming out of the meetings, and this was in more than a few of the different colleges, all right? This was December 6th, 1876. They noticed that the electoral vote was very close, all right? And it could be told, it was understandable because the newspapers were putting out the information the same way the MSM did it today, except probably a little more factual back then. But at least 3 states in the South, all right, they sent 2 sets of electoral votes. So think about that. Imagine if South Carolina or Florida added up all the votes, and instead of saying Trump won, they got a report saying Trump won and a report saying Biden won. What do you do with that? That's what was happening, ladies and gentlemen. I know it took a bit to clarify, but it's a little confusing how it's written. To make matters worse, one of these major parties controlled a house of the outgoing, they controlled one house of the outgoing Congress, while the second party controlled the other house, leaving no possibility of a party line vote in Congress. So it was split because one side controlled one and one side controlled the other. There was a split. There was never going to be a definitive answer there. To this end, Congress quickly passed legislation signed into law by outgoing President Grant, my guy, on January 29, 1877, completely bypassing the usual process of electoral vote counting, instead requiring Congress to hold what would otherwise be the normal tabulation joint session early. In this case, it was held on February 1st, 1877, to discern just which states were in dispute. Congress then formally handed those disputes to a so-called Electoral Commission consisting of senators, congressmen, and U.S. Supreme Court justices appointed to the task by Congress. All right. You see what's happening here in 1876? The earlier than usual meeting of Congress in tabulation joint session was intended to buy the Electoral Commission more time to resolve these disputes before the looming March 4th, 1877 deadline, on which date a new president would have to take office by a combination of constitutional fiat and federal statute. President Grant's term ended no matter what on that date. All right, guys? A joint session to count and tabulate the disputed states' electoral vote as decided by the Electoral Commission was held on March 2nd, 1877, just 2 days, looky, 2 days before the new president, Rutherford B. Hayes, would be constitutionally, what did that say? Rutherford B. Hayes would constitutionally take office. All right, guys? So, we've had issues like this in the past, all right? Crazy issues, and people just aren't realizing that they've happened before. There's nobody alive that have gone through anything like this, and we're going through it right now in this extraordinary time, in this movie like 2020. Don't expect a common ending. Expect it to be like an M. Night Shyamalan movie, or whatever his name is, Shyamalan, M. Night Shyamalan, whatever his name is. The guy that made the movie with Bruce Willis and he's dead and the kid, I see dead people. Bruce Willis, yeah, that crap. Expect there to be a twist. That's what I'm trying to get at. Don't listen to me ramble. Just understand. Expect a twist, because twists happen. They're rare, but they do happen. The whole thing, it hasn't happened for a very long time, but once upon a time, and times before that, we went all the way to 2 days before the swearing in of a new president to figure out who the hell the president was, because of the problems that were presented in trusting the election, the process, what was actually happening. So we are in the same type of dilemma where we have overwhelming fraud now, and we need the time. And if that time, if what they're finding comes out to be true, which it obviously seems to be. We've seized machines. We're finding data. We have video surveillance. We have 1,000 affidavits. I mean, it merits the investigation. It merits looking into what's happening. It merits finding out the truth so we can have a fair and honest election. And if those dates have to be pushed for that, I'm expecting they will. Because it's been done before. If it goes up to the highest level, they're going to take a look and they're going to see that it's happened before. And they're going to see that there's a precedent, and they're going to grant it, no pun intended. They're going to grant it to Trump. They're going to grant us the time. If we need that, we still could see a huge acceleration this week and then just start overturning states. Whether it happens now or later, it's bound to happen. So let's keep going forward. The importance of addressing fraud concerns prior to Inauguration Day. As has been demonstrated in this brief, there is significant flexibility and precedent in U.S. law for changing the date that electors are appointed, changing the date electors convene to vote, and changing the date electors have their vote certified by Congress. We are less than 40% of the way from Election Day to Inaugural Day. This makes such a delay very reasonable, given the unprecedented thin margins between Trump and Biden in several states and the growing evidence of serious amounts of systemic electoral fraud. Meanwhile, Joe Biden and his supporters can continue with important transition work in the event a transfer of power does occur. For the sake of American democracy and to strengthen our fraying social fabric, it is preferable to address the fraud issues before determining who is the next president. And I agree with a lot of this. The investigations will be rigorous and continue whether or not the Electoral College vote is held December 14th. For the sake of the country, Joe Biden and his supporters should welcome a fair and impartial investigation, which we know they don't, especially because they are so confident they will prevail. Otherwise, a dark cloud will hang over the Biden administration if it becomes clear his election was illegitimate and the socio-political fragmentation that is occurring in this country, in this United States, it will only worsen. What he's talking about when he says socio-political fragmentation, he's saying that there's a gigantic rift, a gigantic divide between people and their beliefs in this country. Their social beliefs and their political beliefs are very, very parallel, very different from each other, split apart. And if Biden gets in and does steal the election, and it does come out more and more that he is illegitimate, it's going to lead to a blasting point, a sparking point. We're already close. So, I mean, what he's really getting at is that it'll only make it that much closer. If you really want to translate it, it'll only get that much closer to conflict between people of such opposite belief structures, you know? And we don't want that. We need to somehow figure out how we get back to a more balanced world here, but I don't think it's going to happen for a long time, and it's very possible that we could reach boiling points before that. So let's get through this conclusion here. Election officials in urban Democrat strongholds are behaving similar to a football team which gained an advantage from a questionable play and are now running up to the line of scrimmage to begin the next play before America can throw the red flag on the field and demand a closer look. And that's a great analogy for folks there that like football. But what they're getting at is that they're trying to take their fake victory and they're just running. But you see it happening. You see what they're doing. They opened a fake company where Biden gets to stand in front of a fake seal that says office of the president-elect. It doesn't even exist. It's not a real thing. And he gets to pretend like he's... I saw an article earlier, folks, an article that said Biden and Kamala Harris announce that as soon as the vaccine's available, they have a plan to distribute it to every American for free. And I'm like, that's because Trump already paid for it. You see exactly what they're doing. I don't have to explain that closer or any more detailed for you guys. The deadlines for the seating of electors and their voting, however, is not necessary for the effective transition of power. As we've established, these deadlines were created for the convenience of travel, just as Election Day was placed uniformly on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November to allow farmers to complete the fall harvest prior to voting. In other words, these dates have nothing to do with the transition of power and are largely not relevant to a time when electors don't have to ride horses to Washington, D.C. to vote. It's true. Accordingly, these dates should not interfere with state legislatures effectively investigating the management of the election, especially when we experience unprecedented manipulation of election rules, calling into question hundreds of thousands of ballots. We have and must have time to get it right. And I believe that the fabric of our entire country rests upon making sure that the integrity of our elections are, they're correct. I mean, we want to make sure there's integrity. I lost my word right there. We want to make sure that the integrity of our elections, folks, that they're secure, that the integrity of our elections are not able to be violated by foreign entities or internal terrorists like what we see coming from the left. It's absolutely horrifying. All right. The Constitution explicitly assigns the power to appoint presidential electors to the legislatures of various states. These states, those states' legislatures, have established laws governing the conduct of elections and awarding presidential electors according to the results of the popular vote. The safe harbor provision established by federal statute sets a deadline for determining electors according to laws in place for that purpose in each state. Because the laws governing the conduct of elections were flagrantly violated in numerous states during the 2020 presidential election, there can be no determination of presidential electors pursuant to state law. As such, the Constitution makes clear that the responsibility rests with the state legislature to appoint the electors. That is a fact. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a fact. This should be done as expeditiously as possible. But the only deadline state lawmakers have an obligation to meet is the one deadline set forth in the actual Constitution itself. That's noon, January 20th, 2021. It's not over, folks, till the fat lady sings. Until there's a hand on a Bible and somebody is swearing somebody in, it is not over. I want you to remember that with the 8th fast approaching. I want you to remember what we just went through. We went through a big old 45-minute chunk of this material. And this material should give you the warm and fuzzy and let you know what's actually going on, let you know what the Constitution states. And this was a very, very good breakdown and analysis. I agree with this entire thing. I wouldn't have gone on here and actually presented this big old chunk of reading here from the Thomas More Society if I didn't actually agree with it. All right, you'd know if I was just explaining it and tearing it to pieces, but I didn't tear it to pieces. I tried to dissect it for you and give it to you like a whale that you would eat one bite at a time. All right, this should arm you with some real hard material to go at the left with, guys. It really should. The left is just saying, oh, concede, oh, the Electoral College, oh, you have no pathways. Well, I just showed you the evidence. I just showed you the pathways. I just showed you what the dates meant. I just showed you everything. All right. We know what's about to happen. So strap in. All right. Keep fighting for what's right. Keep supporting the cause and keep your mouth open so that we don't lose our First Amendment, ladies and gentlemen. I really appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed this video or recording if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. And by the way, if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, do me a huge favor. If you loved what we went through, if you are happy to have gotten this information, if you found value in it, give us a 5-star rating. If you have time after that, write a review on there. The more we get these 5-star ratings and these reviews, the more Apple Podcasts moves us up the ratings and the more patriots get to see what we're doing and we get to spread that message and build our community, ladies and gentlemen. We need to keep organized. We need to get together. These are some very strange times and we might have some very conflicted times ahead and we need to have community. And that's what we're doing here at the American Reveille. We are building an entire movement, you could say, of like-minded patriots who are coming together and making a difference in their world, in their communities, and spreading the truth. All right. If you like what I'm doing here, folks, do me a huge favor. If you can. If you can't, I get it. It's not a problem. I set this thing up to be free, and I want you to have this information regardless. But if you're looking for a way to help, head over to my website. All right, guys, go right here to the donate tab and click this button. You could give me $1. You can give me 50 cents. It's going right into the American Reveille LLC bank account, and it's being saved up for much needed improvements and scaling to this operation. The computer I have is crapping out, and it costs like $5,000 for a good studio computer to do this editing. I do all of the editing. I do all the podcasts, the audio, the visual, everything myself. I do have a couple great writers working with me and a couple other people, and I'm excited about the future with that. But But for now, it's just me, this little veteran making it happen. So I need to put money away to upgrade our equipment and expand our operation to get more people working with us and to reach more people. And for that, I really need your help. And again, like I said, if you can't, it's no sweat. Not a big deal. I want you to be here, have a good time, and not feel pressured to do anything like this. So again, don't worry about it if you're not in a situation. But if you're hanging back and you're in the islands doing the thing and you're just like, man, I really want to help out somebody and my Lamborghini needs polishing. Well, man, right there. But, you know, and if you want to give me $1 and that's awesome too. And I greatly, both of those donations are equal to me. I just want to put that there. I'm going way too long on the donation thing, guys. So I want to get off of that. Just thank you so much. I really, really, really appreciate you guys. We're blowing up on YouTube, blowing up on Parler, at the James Lane on Parler. Give me a follow. Check out what we're doing. www.americanreveille.com, the main hub for everything. You can email me directly, jameslane@theamericanreveille.com. Anything, feedback, questions. If you're looking to become a writer, if you have some writing chops and nobody's giving you a look, or if you just want to help out and put some writing effort in, or you have any other skills or talents, you want to volunteer to the American Reveille to help us grow into this organization where we can really help some folks out, let me know. www.americanreveille.com. You can fill out the contact form, or like I said before, email me directly, James Lane at americanreveille.com. Again, thank you guys so much. I'm truly blessed that you're allowing me to be a voice in this, and I'm not going to steer you wrong. I'm not going to steer you wrong, folks. We're going to do this together, and we are going to prevail. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Yeah, mate. Come here, mate. I need to talk to you about something, mate. I need you to subscribe to my YouTube channel right here. There's this subscribe button, right? You hit this subscribe button and you say, hey, mate, I want to be part of the movement, the right-wing conservative movement, right? And then you like it, you share it, right? And we do this because we have a major dingo problem here. Oh, don't get me started on the dingo. They snatch babies. They do all kinds of horrible things. So if you want to prevent dingoes from coming into our cities and attacking our storefronts, taking our babies, doing horrible things, you like it, you share it, you subscribe, and then you go and get Parler right there. You look up at the James Lane. At the James Lane. Yeah. Right there. Excuse me. Oh, God. Yeah. Sorry. So, you subscribe, you follow, you do all that good stuff. We get together and we do a good old-fashioned boot party right there on the left. All right, mate. I'll see you next time.